Hey, I'm Felissa Rose, and you're watching Keto and Crime.
Died from pneumonia. When their baby got sick in April, Herbert and Catherine Schaible didn't call a doctor or seek any kind of medical treatment. They prayed. This case would be tragic even if the facts ended there, but they don't. This is not the first time the Schaibles have been charged in the death of one of their children. They've relied on faith healing before with disastrous results. Here's Gary Tuckman.
At this North Philadelphia cemetery, most of the graves are marked, but not this spot, where two small children are buried. Two children who would be alive today, say authorities, if their parents gave them medical care. Herbert and Catherine Schaible are charged with third-degree murder following the death of their 8-month-old son, Brandon, this spring.
Instead of caring and nurturing him, they ultimately caused his death by praying over his body instead of taking him to the doctor.
And unbelievably, this isn't the first time this has happened to the Schaibles. In 2009, their 2-year-old son, Kent, died. The parents did not seek medical care to treat him.
I tried the previous case 2.5 years ago, and the circumstances to that case to this case are eerily similar.
In the first case, the Schaibles were found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Kent. The prosecutor asked for prison time, but the judge instead opted for probation and allowed the couple to move back to their home with their 7 other children. The judge did order them to seek medical care for their children in the future. Joanne.
My name is Eric Nelson, and I am the legislative and media spokesperson for Christian Science in Northern California. Christian Science is a religion that was founded by Mary Baker Eddy in the late 19th century. And Mary Baker Eddy said that she founded her religion largely based on her understanding, her reading, her study of the Bible. And of course, that includes both the Old and the New Testament. Healing was very much a part of...
Hey everyone, welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today we're doing our 3rd episode of Cult Watch by delving into the strange world of Christian Science. This is an interesting subject, and don't let the term science confuse you, because it's not that. We're going to get into that. Now, I'm going to be on the road over the weekend for a show in Abbeville, South Carolina, so I will be pre-filming my Friday video, but we'll be going into Al Capone's St. Valentine's Day party. I can't say what it really was because I'll get demonetized, but look out for that on Friday, and then Sunday I'll have another true crime as well. So, but let's get into the world of Christian Science. This is going to be a fun ride. To get back to the roots of what is Christian Science, we have to go all the way back to early 19th century America in New England to find a young lady by the name of Mary Baker Eddy. Now, before we start the history of this cult/church, I want to make sure that you understand they are not Christian Scientists. They are not scientists who happen to be Christian that somehow perfectly meld the world of science and religion to give you a philosophy. They are not that at all. They believe that the Bible, God's Word, is greater than science and kind of trumps all science, especially when it comes to the healing arts. So they are in no way people that have somehow rectified the gap between religion and science. Please don't take that away from this. Their roots, though, go back, like I said, to early 19th century in New England, where a young lady by the name of Mary Baker Eddy was born in the small town of Bow, New Hampshire, July 16, 1821. She was a sickly child, and for those of you on video, she's here to my top right. She was also the young lady on the front of the presentation. She was very sickly. She had just about somebody who wrote about her said that she had probably every nervous ailment that a young lady of that age could have. She had a bad back. she suffered from headaches, fainting spells, just a lot of different stuff. At the age of 16, she discovered the local Shaker commune. And if you don't know what the Shakers are, their technical name is United Society of Believers for the Second Appearing of Christ. They were kind of born out of the Quaker movement or Friends Society movement, as well as the Amish. They kind of fall on that line. So they kind of came out of, originally in France, out of the Quaker movement, and then kind of reached a high point in the 1800s here in America, particularly in the areas of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, because of a lady by the name of Anne Carr. Now, the Shakers were called Shakers because they had a ritual dance where they kind of gyrated around. So that's how they got their name, Shakers. And it was kind of a play on Quaker. But they believed that God was the ultimate decider of all things. They kind of went back to a primitive view of things. They lived in communes without electricity or any sort of modern comfort. They also did not marry and preached a life of celibacy. So there was no procreation with the Shakers, which is one reason they died out, as you can imagine. They would instead kind of proselytize and bring people in and adopt children, orphans, which is a good thing, and kind of raise them up. And that's how Anne Carr came to be a part of the Shakers, and she kind of became their great revolutionary, their great revelator, the ultimate leader of Shakerism, if you will, in the United States. They also broke tradition because they believed in racial and gender equality. They led to a lot of opportunities for females, and because their ultimate leader was a female, she was seen as even higher than Jesus in a lot of ways, because that's how they put their high people, their clergy. So because of her being quite ill, and because of this time in America where women were highly subjugated, I mean, women, like single moms, was not a thing. Because if you had a child out of wedlock, that child was automatically stripped from you, because there was actually a law on the books in some states that forbade women to actually assume guardianship of a minor child. So, yeah, women were absolutely property. And a young, sickly girl growing up in that era, you can see how they might be attracted to that sort of living. She wanted to leave her parents and go and live in this commune. But they, of course, would not allow her. But that did not stop her from becoming an avid reader of everything the Shakers put out, and as well as the Bible and anything else she was allowed to study, because young girls were only given a certain type of education in this time. So mainly how to be a homemaker. So she read whatever her parents would allow her to read. And as a result, she read a lot about the Shakers and kind of thought about religion in general, because like a lot of people in New Hampshire, her family were just run-of-the-mill Protestants. Again, she grew up very sickly. She did marry at the tender age of 19. Her first husband passed away just before her 23rd birthday when she was 6 months pregnant. So she gave birth to this child after the death of her husband. She would eventually lose custody of her child when the child was 4, because she could not care for him, and because of this law, and because pretty much a state of poverty, living on the mercy of her parents. She would marry again. That husband, who actually she said promised to become the legal guardian of her son, kind of backed out on that promise and left her after 13 years. We don't have a whole lot of record of why that happened. Towards the latter part of her life, toward the late 1800s, she would marry again, and this husband would become instrumental in what she later built, as we know as Christian Science. Probably the greatest leap on her way from becoming Mary Baker Eddy, admirer of the Shakers, to Mary Baker Eddy, creator of Christian Science, was when she met a former clockmaker from Portland, Maine, by the name of Phineas Quimby in 1862. He was practicing mesmerization from the French guy Philip Mesmer, who actually would hypnotize people and cure them of all sorts of ailments and vices and things like that. He was practicing healing arts by virtue of mesmerizing, and she became absolutely obsessed with this and kind of studied this. He did kind of have a revelation from a dream he had one night that probably mesmerizing people wasn't the best way to go, and to get back to the basics of the Bible for the true meaning of healing. So he started reading the Bible and studying the Bible, and he came upon Jesus healing the man with the leprotic arm. He came to the revelation the healing of the arm wasn't so much that the arm was the disease, that the arm was the symptom of what else was wrong with this person. That is, lack of faith, forgetting the true God, and allowing disease to attack. And so that became the foundation of Christian Science. Basically, they believe disease is either a figment of the imagination or the mind, or sin and your faith not being strong enough. He took on that philosophy and taught it to his new disciple, Mary Baker Eddy, who just absorbed every one of his teachings. He would later die around 1865, 1866, but during the time that Mary Baker Eddy knew him, he was treating approximately 500 patients a year by sitting with them, counseling them about faith and things like that, healing them through the power of forgiveness and God, and she took on that whole philosophy. In fact, it came to a head when her and her third husband, Asa Gilbert, and her moved to the town of Lynn, Massachusetts. She took a tumble on the ice and hurt her back. And she kind of immersed herself in the reading of the Bible. And she said because of the revelations that she found through reading the Bible, her back was healed. Not only was her back healed, but she felt better than she had ever felt in her life. However, the doctor that was actually treating her said that he had her on morphine, and she also took a few home remedies, and that her injury wasn't that serious. That's the reason she was able to have such an astounding recovery. But the mind wants what the mind wants, I suppose. So from that point on, that was literally the birthplace of modern Christian Science. From that point on, she started reading and writing as much as she could about this newfound power to heal yourself and to find true medical healing through the power of God and restored faith in Him. It was basically a fundamentalist view of the Bible with a couple of exceptions. Remember we talked about her view of the Shakers? Well, since the Shakers was basically a feminist type religion in that they believed in gender equality, she kind of moved away from the biblical teachings about how women were sort of second-class citizens, and she became the head of the church, in fact, elevating herself even above Jesus in many congregations because she believed she was on the same level with Jesus. Jesus was a revelator. She was a revelator, which means he or she that gives God's wisdom. So she began writing a lot of different works, among them the first Christian Science journal, things of that nature, and she really found a huge following during the early days. One of her major converts was Clara Clemens, the daughter of Samuel Clemens, who writes under the pen name Mark Twain. Now, because his daughter got involved with what he considered a cult, he wasn't having it, so he wrote some scathing articles about Christian Science. And their technical name is actually Church of Christ Scientists. So if you see that on a church, it's a Christian Science church. My wife has an aunt who is straight up Church of Christ, and I consider them pretty fundamentalist. But I was discussing this case with her, and even she was blown away. She's like, well, one thing God gave you was common sense to go to the doctor when you're sick. These people didn't have that. So if you're a Church of Christ person, you walk into a Church of Christ Scientist church, you're going to be shocked. I'll just put it that way. But because she kind of recruited this high-profile convert, And let's face it, women were drawn to this because it did preach gender equality, something that wasn't mainstream. I mean, this was even before women's suffrage in the 1920s, so you had people that were made to feel like second-class citizens. Women, other racial minorities, really found a home in this church because of its belief on equality. So you can understand how it started to grow. But Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, wasn't having it. He wrote scathing articles about the church, particularly in the early editions of Cosmopolitan magazine, and there was just a war of words between Mark Twain and Mary Baker Eddy. If you Google some of this, it's hilarious the way they went at each other. And to quote Mark Twain, religion was invented when the first con man crossed paths with the first fool. And that was his whole, he was pretty much an atheist. That was his whole view on religion in general, not to mention a religion like this that controls your personal life. Remember, just like the Shakers, she believed in as much celibacy as possible. The marriage was not required, and they always consulted prayer and spiritual healing over medical intervention when anyone got sick or injured. So in his determination, as we've studied in the past, a cult, a church, a religion that controls your personal aspects of your life is very definitely a cult, and this fits that model. So the religion continued to grow, mainly because of its belief in equality. You had all sorts of people being sort of officially made Christian Science doctors, Christian Science physicians, Christian Science nurses by Mary Baker Eddy. She established some nursing and medical schools based on her writings and on the writings of Quimby. And so you had professional opportunities that were afforded to women and minorities that were afforded anywhere else. Of course, it started to grow. Clara Clemens remained a member of Christian Science till well into her life. So you had some high-profile people of the day in this religion. It continued to grow. They established churches in many, beautiful churches in many metropolitan areas. And it reached its heyday of 11,200 physicians practicing healing arts on its members, which swelled well into the hundreds of thousands in 1931. Between the 1930s and the 1940s was its heyday, where it swelled to well over 11,000 practitioners of Christian Science. And it has dropped to well below 1,000 since up until 2015. So it's kind of on its way out. A lot of that has to do with their, they kind of lightened up on the whole celibacy, not getting married thing, because they realized that's what happened to the Shakers. They died out because they weren't reproducing and really weren't adopting enough people in to keep it going. So they kind of loosened their beliefs on marriage and celibacy and started procreating, but they have always held on to their core belief that disease and injury is the result of lack of faith and lack of oneness with God. And this has gotten them into a lot of trouble. Mary Eddy would die in 1910, several years after her third husband died in 1875 from what she called animal magnetism. She actually believed that people like Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, and other people that were kind of against her in the Boston area had spiritual power over her husband and caused him to die. So there was a lot of woo mixed in with this religion. But as I said, their belief in not consulting a doctor first and foremost has gotten them into a lot of trouble, particularly with children. A lot of children have died that were members of this religion because their parents refused to seek medical treatment. Between 1887 and 1990 in the United States, over 50 documented cases of children dying from lack of medical care because their parents were members of Christian Science. Probably one of the most well-known in 1967 in Cape Cod, a young girl died of pneumonia. In 1977, a young man in Detroit, Michigan, died of bacterial meningitis, even though it was proven that a antibiotic treatment could have saved his life within just a couple of days of his death. And finally, the most damaging case to Christian Science that kind of started its decline was in 1989, when a young boy died in Minneapolis, Minnesota of hypoglycemia when it was proven that an injection of insulin would have saved his life up until about 2 hours before his death. That, even though they haven't really been prosecuted in a court of law because the United States values religious freedom, so they haven't really been censored that way, but in that particular case, the father sued Christian Science and won a $5 million settlement against the church. So that case kind of started spiraling, and you have seen its members drop to estimates of well below 5,000 members nationwide. However, that does not stop them from appearing to be a huge church. They still have many of these beautiful churches around the country. They still have many of their publications like the Christian Science Journal. I'm sure we've all heard of the Christian Science Monitor. It's still published monthly. They have a pretty high-tech, well-developed website that you can go to as well to get all kinds of information. So by all appearances, they appear to be a thriving religion, when in reality they're a dying cult. So that's where Christian Science stands. They are not scientists. I don't know if they're really Christians, but that's where we stand with them. They're another weird cult that I stumbled upon and I thought you would be interested in. I hope you enjoyed this. Like, comment, share, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, I've got links below. Let me know what you think. Have you ever met anybody associated with Christian Science? Have you ever been privy to any of their teachings? Have you ever read the Christian Science Monitor not realizing what it was? Let me know. And I'll see you soon with another video or podcast. Thank you so much. Keto Comic out.